Did you know that there was a storyline to Palworld? Hello and welcome, my name is Turmentic, and today we are going to be talking about Palworld. There's an actual story in Palworld that you can find throughout all of the journal entries. Palworld is a new survival game by the company Pocket Pair, where you have to build buildings around to protect yourself, and you run around basically capturing little creatures called pals, who then actually can work inside of your base to help you move forward. I've had a blast playing the early access version of the game, and I kept finding journal entries, and they got me really thinking about, like, what is the actual real story that's going on this island. The game takes place in an area called the Palpagos Islands. That's an island group consisting of about roughly 15 different regions. Not much is known about the island or pals, but hopefully this should help you understand the basic storyline of what they're trying to set up, at least with this early action version, between the pals and the different 5 factions. The Castaway journals, there are a lot more of those. They go more in depth. It's more kind of explaining a lot of the gameplay. There's a lot of really good story bits in those, but that will be a separate video that I'm going to make specifically for those. But let's jump right into the 5 factions and what we know about them so far. The first faction that we meet is the Rain Syndicate, led by Zoe Rain and her electric pal Grisol. Zoe has 5 journal entries, and to be honest, her story is kind of sad in my opinion. She states that she has no family. Her dad, who was a syndicate boss at one point, left, and she says that she has never seen her mother's face. It's mostly Grisol and the syndicate members that raise her, basically from a young kid to who we meet inside of the game. She goes on to explain how pretty much the syndicate operates. They use guns in order to weaken the pals, which they then capture with the pal spheres, which they then take to the other weird guys, she says, which I'm assuming is the person running the black market. They sell the pals there, use that money for food, which they actually share with Zoe, and she believes they only are sharing it with her because of who her dad actually was. It's worth pointing out that the way that it's worded, it says one of the bosses, meaning that there are multiple bosses of the syndicate, and so her father wasn't the only one, I'm assuming. I also really want to reiterate that they really focus on the fact that she only believes, even though she's climbed the ranks and she is now a boss herself, she really feels that the syndicate only kept her alive and kept her around because of her father being a boss at one point. Now, her second journal entry actually talks about how she met Grisol. Originally, Grisol was actually captured and was going to be sold by the syndicate and actually in order to make some money. But she waited until everybody fell asleep. Once they fell asleep, she went over and unlocked the cage and they escaped. Now, with her being as young as she was, they had to return pretty much within like the next day or so. They were very hungry, they didn't have any food. So the syndicate members actually, when she returned, locked her up and threw her in the cage as well. Well, something kind of crazy happened. She realized that she could give Grisol an actual command and he would listen to her. So she told him to attack, and he attacked, sending a huge lightning bolt down into the camp, knocking all of the syndicate members out. And pretty much from that point forward, her and Grisol were inseparable. This entry is interesting because it actually goes with the lore, if you will, of the game itself, where when you run into a syndicate camp and one of the pals is actually in one of those cages, if you free it, you automatically get it. It is now your pal. And so this is kind of cool because it follows that to where Zoe released Grisol from one of those cages, and because of her doing that, she is now the owner of Grisol. Now, the third entry is an introduction to the Free Pal Alliance, or the FPA. Zoe explains that the FPA doesn't like that the syndicate sells pals and uses weapons against them. Zoe explains that the two groups have been in an endless conflict. She even goes on to talk about how she asked an older member of the syndicate and was told that the two groups have always fought, that the syndicate and the FPA have been around for a very long time. The groups have been fighting for so long that they don't even exactly remember what started the conflict. Zoe is, I like Zoe. I like what they're doing with these journal entries with her, because they end it with her actually being like, well, maybe maybe they all can't be that bad if they actually really want to protect PALs. And we'll get into the FPA here in a bit, but that's her mindset. She's thinking that, well, if they really care about these PALs, then they can't be all bad. So why exactly are we still fighting this ancient war almost? Zoe's fourth journal entry talks about her wondering what the outside world is like. She's never been able to leave the island. She does say that she knew of one man that tried to leave, but he was never seen again. Now, there are people that do show up on the island, and one of the reasons why she can tell that they're different is because they use different tools. It's the different tools that these strangers have that convinces her that there's something beyond the Great Sea, besides the giant tree that you can see off in the distance. Zoe desperately wants to go to these other places. She wants to see these other islands. She wants to see these people. The last journal entry that she has is her wondering why she's protecting the Syndicate Tower. She thought it was obvious since her father protected it before her, but she's wondering why have they done it before in the first place. There is a legend that was passed down on the island that somehow the tower is related to that legend and it has some big, great power. She wonders what that power might be, but she never actually stops protecting the tower, almost like she's being compelled to do it. She mentions the other towers as well, and it's worth pointing out here that this is the only real journal entry that we have that pertains to the towers for the most part, but I'm wondering if the other four, if they're being compelled, they feel like they need to protect this tower for whatever reason. Because the other four that protect the towers, they're all the leaders of the different 5 factions. Because going a little bit deeper, and we'll talk more about this when we look at the Castaway journals, there's a lot of thought that there was an ancient civilization on this island, that there's tons of older technology. I mean, you're finding ancient civilization bit parts and things like that thrown throughout the different parts of the island. So there's an idea that these towers are part of some sort of ancient technology, that there's some sort of great power source. But again, we'll talk more about that kind of once we get into the Castaway journals. Now, the next faction that we're going to talk about is the Free PAL Alliance. Lily Everheart is the one that actually runs that group, and they are a group that believes PALs are sacred and should be revered. They have 5 traditional commandments, which are 1. Thou must not eat PALs. 2. Thou must not overwork PALs. 3. Thou must not abuse PALs. 4. Thou must not use PALs for experiments. And 5. Thou must risk thy life to protect PALs. In her first journal entry, she claims that PALs have upheld their civilization since ancient times. She then goes on to talk about the downfall of humans, calling humans savage animals. They subjugate other species and enslave them, engage in pointless strife, consume flesh for no reason, and develop beyond their own needs. She confirms also that once a PAL is captured in a PAL sphere, they become obedient to their master. And she finishes the entry talking about how humans and PALs were originally meant to live alongside each other in harmony. And then finishes with saying that eating a PAL for food is akin to blasphemy against God. Her second entry details the day she met Liline for the first time, her PAL that resembles a flower. Liline was being attacked by the Syndicate. She describes that they were throwing Palsphere after Palsphere at this beautiful, beautiful flower, and she wanted to save Liline. So what she did was she stabbed the Syndicate that were attacking her through the hearts, and she stomped the Palspheres that were all thrown out across the ground. Lily, horrified at herself, her hands covered in blood, ran back to the base, only to find the Queen of the Lilies herself, Liline, there waiting for her. From that day forward, Liline and Lily were inseparable. It's worth noting that Lily is also the only commander that does not keep her PAL in a PAL sphere. Liline actually runs alongside her free at all times. Her third journal entry goes over the commandments that we talked about at the beginning. Her fourth entry, though, is interesting. It talks about the sanctuaries and how she fears poachers are going to go after the rare and endangered PALs that live on them. As much as she doesn't want to, she enlists the help of the PIDF, or the Palpagos Island Defense Force, to protect the 3 sanctuaries. She notes, though, that the amount that they have to pay for the fence is enormous. Her subordinates, though, have figured out a way to pay for it, but she doesn't understand how they can find large sums of money just from raiding poor poacher camps. In reality, Lily is really the only one that is living by the 5 commandments, and the other FPA members are pretty much just doing what they have to in order to keep the belief structure in place. Now, these next two factions aren't really what they seem to be at face value. The first one is the Palpagos Island Defense Force, or the PIDF, and it acts as the self-proclaimed law enforcement of the island. You can find a PIDF member at each of the encampments and all 3 sanctuary islands. It's their job to keep the peace. Makes sense, they're the police force. Their leader, though, is a man named Marcus Dryden, who uses a fire elemental pal Phalaris as his partner. Now, looking at the journal entries, it really shows us who Marcus is. It seems like his only goal on the island is to suppress the inhabitants. He releases stems or drugs to the black market and then arrests the people that use them and get caught, takes the contraband from them, and then releases it back into the black market. He calls the entire island his sandbox that he can do whatever he wants in. Between his cornering of the stem market and the huge price tag that he charges the FPA for protecting the sanctuaries, he's honestly one of the most powerful people on Palpagos Island, in my opinion. He appears to me, though, to be a little paranoid, even at one point, though, because his second journal entry, he talks about how his partner Phalaris would probably eat his corpse, but they need to watch each other's back for now until at least one of them falls. With the presence that they have on the island, I think it'd be very easy for Marcus to take complete control if he needed to at any point. The next faction is the Pal-Genetic Research Unit, or Pgru. They are dedicated to researching and developing PALs, led by their commander, Victor Ashford. They seek to create the ultimate PAL through genetic manipulation and selective breeding. We don't get a ton of info regarding the Pgru from Victor's diary because it's mostly just experiments going over and explaining a couple different experiments that he did. But we do get some interesting info. It seems that Victor was trying to combine a 4-legged PAL and a winged PAL, but was not successful. The PAL wouldn't form, and even if it did, it would only form for a couple seconds before it would disappear. He goes on to say that a re-examination of base DNA is desirable, but would require new equipment, that the current equipment came from the outside and is limited. Now, when he says outside, does he mean outside of the island? It's because of the limitations, though, that he creates the PAL Essence Condenser. This allows them to liquefy a PAL and administer the liquid to a PAL of the same family, allowing that PAL to absorb the energy from the original. It brings up the question, though, is the recipient growing stronger because they share the same family, or is there an inherent distinct energy that each PAL has that is essential for their own survival? The third and last of the journal entries that we get from Victor is kind of dark. At the beginning, he's extremely excited because he was able to combine 2 different PALs in order to create the hybrid that he really wanted to. He named this PAL Shadowbeak, but Victor notes that the experiment cannot be reproduced, so Shadowbeak is truly a unique PAL. They don't know how Shadowbeak was able to actually combine. They don't know what the catalyst was or anything like that. Shadowbeak is just there. Now they have it. They can study it. He's ecstatic, but he doesn't know how to reproduce it. At the end of the journal entry, though, he talks about how he's upset because his lab assistant, Alex, went missing. Now, there's the running theory that Alex and the original PAL they were experimenting on were the ones that combined. That's what created Shadowbeak. That's why you can't find Alex. And that does line up. But I have another interesting theory of potentially who Alex is. And that brings us to our final faction. Axel Tavers is the current leader of the Brothers of the Eternal Pyre. Not much at all is known about Axel or his group. There is literally no real journal entries that talk about them. There's only one that Axel gets, and it is literally rap lyrics. It's kind of funny, talking about how he isn't afraid to pretty much fight anybody that we want. Axel does have his trusty pal, which is a lightning pal named Ozurk. In my opinion, it is possible that Axel might be the missing lab assistant Alex. We don't really have a timeline, though, of when Alex left and Axel appeared. We don't really know that much about the Brother of Eternal Pyre either. So until we get more information about this faction, that's kind of going to just be up there in theory. Now that we covered all of the 5 different factions, we can kind of start seeing the politics of the island, of Palpagos Island. All of the factions seem to have been on the island for a long time, minus the Brothers of the Eternal Pyre. They're the only ones that I actually get the feeling that they're a newer group. I'd even say that the Rain Syndicate and the FPA have been on there since antiquity, since maybe before the collapse of whatever it was that brought the loss of technology to Palpagos Island, because they're alluding to the fact that this is an ancient civilization. The two factions, the Rain Syndicate and the FPA, have been fighting for so long that no one remembers what started the conflict whatsoever, but they still keep that conflict going. Add the PIDF into the mix and you could have the factions literally fighting for generations, especially with the state that the PIDF is in. Instead of protecting the citizens of Palpagos, the leader Marcus is actually actively trying to keep them down, retain them from being able to be like, hey, I should have this right. And if that's been something that's been going on for generations, the PIDF could actually have been acting like that since antiquity. I mean, these could literally be how these social groups have operated for hundreds of years. Now, the Brothers of Eternal Pyre, like I was saying, I feel is the youngest of all of the factions, but in all honesty, they could be an offshoot of the Defense Force, of the Pal Alliance, or the Syndicate at any point in time. Another really big thing to point out too is the dynamic of the research unit. They're in open conflict with the Free Pal Alliance because it literally breaks one of their commandments. They are researching on POWs. But the police force, the PIDF, doesn't go after the researchers, but protects them. And that again tells me that Marcus is probably one of the most powerful people on this island, underneath Victor, of course. Victor, I feel, is, if you would have a big baddie, quote unquote, that would be Victor. He would be the mastermind. But I'm interested to see how the power dynamic actually grows between the five factions as we move forward. Because the grip that Marcus has on the island with the police force literally would allow Victor to do whatever he wanted with any of the pals or the humans that existed on the island. But that's all I got on the five factions and their journal entries. Like I said, I'm going to take the Castaway journals. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to go through and break them down and actually try to come up with some sort of a timeline. The game right now is still in early access. It's not the finished product. I fully believe that they're going to actually give us more information. They're going to give us more lore, more story, especially as we start getting further into more content. They've already talked about adding new islands, raid bosses, other things like that. I would imagine we'd get more information, especially on the Rain Syndicate, because the Rain Syndicate, the Free Pal Alliance, and the Police Defense Force are the three big ones. I feel like the research group, yes, they're a big powerful faction, but I feel like there's less of them and they're just like on top, whereas the other three are the three big contenders that actually want to like kind of like almost duke it out in essence. But saying that, like Zoe was saying, she doesn't even know why they're still fighting. Make sure to give this video a like if you found it helpful, and leave a comment down below and let me know what your thoughts are so far of Palworld. But my name is Turmentic, and until next time, I hope you all have a wonderful night.